Thousands of tech layoffs have happened in the past 18 months. Should you still be thinking about transitioning into IT? Let's talk about it. So regarding tech layoff, we have to look at the big picture. For example, first thing we should do is look at the key factors. For example, there's the pandemic. With the pandemic, there was a lot of hiring happening because everything was going online. A lot of systems were getting overloaded. So there was a lot of hiring happening.
Yeah, and companies had to invest a lot in order to be able to support a remote workforce. It's a workforce that used to come to the office, stopped coming to the office, and we're now working from home. So they needed to acquire technology, hire people, and develop things so that could work.
Very fast. So there was an overemployment, of course. Yes. So also, when we are looking at the layoff, we have to also consider the possibility of the market just correcting itself. That's the first thing we have to make sure we understand.
And that's something that in general happens in a cyclical manner. So every 10, 12 years, the economy shifts and companies react to that by laying off people. On top of that, the pandemic created another situation. And it was that if you were especially a big company, let's say you were the Google or the Microsoft, and you had most of your workforce in San Francisco making top dollars because that's one of the most expensive places to work in the US. And now you sent them home and these employees decide what to do, where to live, where to spend their money. They will not stay in San Francisco. So companies started to hire more people remotely and noticed that productivity was up and that they didn't need to pay so many top dollars to have their people locally close to their local offices. So this was also a way to kind of get rid of some of these high paid employees.
And along the same line, there was a lot of not only what you said, but a lot of offshoring.
Yeah.
Because now there's no coming to the office. So a person doing the job in San Francisco, Alabama, or Colombia is the same thing.
Yes.
So every company, their first job is to try to get top talent wherever that talent is cheapest. So they were going out, they still are, as much as they can, hiring all around the world, especially in Colombia. We're talking about Dominican Republic. We're talking about India. We're talking about Philippines. So these things happen also and made the pandemic, what happened in the pandemic even bigger as a situation.
And we even have to mention something that happened to us at Yellowtail. You weren't a strong believer in remote work. But after remote work became the norm, you got to test it with all our employees. You were convinced that it was a viable model.
Yeah.
And I think this happened to a lot of companies.
It's like I always say, even to my employees, after 2020, it's like I have a new company. The way we operate has completely, and I mean not one thing has stayed the same. So all these realities have happened in the space. So now when we're looking at this reality, there are things you can do to actually shield yourself from these layoffs. First, you have to be in an area, in a track that is high skilled. Yeah. Because if you dissect the layoffs, even if it's technical, you're gonna see that it's the lower level technical jobs that are being laid off. The specialized job like Linux system admin, like cloud computing, those specialized jobs. Cybersecurity. This is not where you see the layoffs.
No. We actually see the layoffs mostly in HR. So, and that's another thing that we need to talk about, that it's that when we hear the headlines, it sounds techie. The jobs sound techie because they come from tech companies,
Yeah.
but they don't necessarily affect tech roles at tech companies, at least not completely, right? So there's a lot of HR roles, there's a lot of sales roles. Imagine, before the pandemic, people in tech sales were traveling all over the country visiting customers. After the pandemic, nobody travels.
Exactly.
You get on a Zoom call and you make your sale.
Yeah.
So this brought in a lot of more efficiency, but also took some jobs out in that field.
But some jobs were added as well.
Yes, of course.
That's another part that's not being talked about in the tech industry. As jobs that are no longer relevant are getting laid off, some new jobs are coming in. More job around building system to take on. For example, Zoom. Zoom has grown 10x. Guess what? They need more people to actually support that growth. While some companies are shrinking,
Yeah.
some are getting bigger. So we have to make sure we understand all these intricacies and understand there is the headlines versus reality. Because the headlines, they only focus on the 5 or 10 biggest companies when they lay off. We're talking about Tesla or Google or Apple. And whenever those numbers come out, because they come out from a tech a company, you think it's
We
100.
assume they're tech roles.
They are tech roles, and they are not necessarily all that.
Yeah. Another factor is that in these past 3 years, AI came and started to, it created its own revolution inside of IT departments. And yes, it's taking some jobs, but you know what? It's also creating jobs.
Very much so.
And it's creating tech jobs in outside tech environments. So now you can apply AI to anything.
Definitely.
Like pharmaceuticals are using it, marketing companies are using it, the finance industry is using it. So this is creating new opportunities where people that have tech skills can pivot.
Yeah. So to me, the tech layoff is just a cycle of laying off irrelevant workers for the marketplace and adding new, more relevant workers to this new marketplace. And the next thing I want to talk about is the segmentation of the marketplace.
Yep.
We have the big 20 companies like the Googles, the Teslas, but we have the 3 to 500 million dollar companies. We have the SMEs and we have the startups. We still, those SMEs and mid-market companies, those 3 to 500 million dollar companies, they are growing.
Yes, and still hiring.
They are growing, and they need to support this growth with hires.
Yep.
So, and also this is where we see most of the placement of our student. It's not with Google. It's
No.
not with Tesla. These companies, they are even better at making the news, but they are not necessarily good at keeping the hiring process going.
Yeah, definitely.
So we have to be careful when we're looking at the layoffs. Yes, it's happening, but it's definitely cyclical. It's definitely ushering out the jobs that are no longer relevant to the reality of today, but there are so many new jobs. And if you want to shield yourself from a layoff, you can do two things. You can either make sure you go deep, make sure you become a subject matter expert, because a subject matter expert is very difficult to replace, or you make sure you go into GovTech, because these jobs are very difficult to have layoffs in. If you're working for the government, layoffs are almost impossible to happen.
So as I said before, the industry is definitely in a period of transition, but new opportunities are emerging. Artificial intelligence is creating new opportunities. There's been a lot of surveys going on with the population that was laid off, and they're seeing that these people have some have flourished and created their own startups. So this is also creating new opportunities, new services, and hopefully the people that are laid off are able to find jobs quickly. Hopefully they can retool and specialize more in their roles so that they can prevent this from happening to them in the future.
So if you're still asking yourself if you should go into IT, the answer is yes.